Richard Corrigan, Chief Officer, Department for the Economy.
Charlotte Howe, Sector Lead for Arts, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you. We'll dive straight in. Minister, can I ask you for an overview of the budget? What kind of budget is this, would you say?
Well, it's a kind of from a Department of the Economy perspective, it's a status quo budget, I'd say. This year's funding, the overall big global number for Department for the Economy, Department for the Local Economy, I need to say, not Department for the Economy, because this doesn't include financial services, which is obviously Deputy Gorse.
Okay.
37 million, 16,000 for this year, 38 million and 56,000 for next year.
Okay, that's a slight decrease on what was projected in the previous budget, is that correct?
Yes, quite possibly. I mean, it's just the average. There's been no growth from any growth bids, so any growth has just come through normal kind of RPI factoring.
Okay, I'm not sure if that was correct, what I said. I'm dealing with some very small writing.
I think it will be dealt with.
Yeah.
It will probably be what was predicted under RPI. RPI was slightly less, so you get less than was predicted, I imagine, as well.
Okay. I mean, can you talk to us about the general purpose of the overall budget? I mean, is this a savings budget? I mean, we know that there's a prioritisation of funding towards health, for example. Is that...
For me, that's the big headline, is the funding for health. That's where most of the growth in this budget is. And certainly for other departments such as the economy or environment or elsewhere, it's been a case of making savings and sticking to previously agreed budgets.
What savings have you been expected to make? What's the headline?
So this year was 1.047 million, and 2026 384,000. And I'm very pleased with the work of the director Richard Corrigan and his team, people like Charlotte as well, because we're able to do the 2026 savings without any further changes to headcount or anything like this. So from our perspective, we're well set for 2026.
What kind of percentage cut is that in terms of your, is it around about the two?
It's about 1%, 384,000 would be about 1%.
Yeah, the 384 is about 1% of the overall.
Yeah, working out whether I'd gone too far or not far enough.
Specifically on the staff costs side, so what we did is recognising savings targets for 25 and 26. We acted early upon those to establish ourselves on the right trajectory.
Yeah.
So we've already taken the steps there in terms of the structure of the department and not replacing certain roles as they've come up or fixed term contracts ended to make sure that we've delivered in 25 and we're on the right trajectory for 26 already. So there's no further impact on the staffing side.
So we may look into this in more detail later or subsequently, but do you feel that you've got sufficient staffing levels to be able to do your job correctly and also to serve the local economy?
I think in many ways, I think that is more a question for Richard in the sense of, because regardless of what initiatives I throw your way, you're the person who's going to make sure to get them delivered.
Yeah, so I mean, fundamentally, I think from our perspective, if you have more, you can do more. If you have less, you make do and you do less. So in terms of the staffing we have, I think we are the right size. We are pretty much at the same headcount across the whole of the department as we were in 2020. So the narrative of growth of headcount in the public sector doesn't apply to us. We've been flat, we are lean, we are focused on sectors and roles such as Charlotte's. So we're not the engine for growth either in what people perceive to be civil servants or overall public sector headcount. And we just have to remain focused and disciplined around the minister's priorities to ensure that we're delivering in that prioritised order rather than trying to boil the ocean in a way that would be uncoordinated and unproductive.
Minister, I mean, what's your ambition for 2026?
To make sure I'm still Minister for Sustainable Economic Development when PERDA starts.
but from a departmental perspective, I mean, what do you really want to achieve?
I want to hand over to whoever the next minister is, a department which is, I think Richard said, is lean but is focused, is very much able to communicate and interact with the business sector in a really good and meaningful way. And I think our department does that better, as it should, better than any other department in the government. And we're a department that also works a lot with other departments to help them come around to understanding the economic priorities around things. We've seen this around planning, etc. So from my perspective, it's, from the resources of the department, one that's in the right place, and as Richard says, we are. But from the perspective of handing over to a new minister, it's a department which is still very focused on making sure that Jersey's economy is going to be able to sustain it into the long term, and therefore is able to speak to businesses, encourage businesses to move here, encourage businesses to invest, and act in a timely fashion that businesses can understand.
Okay, thank you.
Minister, I mean, it's difficult to analyse counterfactuals in a budget, but are there any areas that you would have liked to have seen more investment in if this hadn't been a budget where you expected to deliver savings?
I mean, there is kind of one area that's not just about financial investment. I still think that Jersey needs to put more of a focus onto our relations with Europe, particularly France, and that's from an economic perspective as much as it is a political perspective. And it isn't just about money, that's also about the government itself thinking about that side. But I think I've said before, it strikes me that we've not had a debate about Europe since the TCA debate in 2020.
What, in terms of the economy
That's
department,
where I would say.
what's the focus and the benefit that we would see from focusing more on Europe
I think
to the economy?
So a lot of this comes around one, supply chains, which we've talked about many times, and having a diversified and therefore more resilient supply chain. And equally from the arts, culture, heritage perspective, I think Jersey's unique selling point in many ways is our relationship to Europe. The French history that we have, the Gérier history that we have, that speaks to tourism as much as it speaks to any other part of the economy as well. From an environmental perspective, produce grown on Jersey and also in Brittany and in Normandy is effectively local produce, as opposed to flying it in from New Zealand or Colombia and so on and so forth. So there are huge environmental gains to be taken as well. But the main one I'd say is the supply chain. It still strikes me as slightly absurd that we bring our food in from 100 miles away across choppy seas, very choppy seas in a day like today, when a large part of that food could be coming from 30 miles away in much calmer seas. So we have a supply chain which is highly stressed because of the choices we've made to send it, want them to be structured. I do see them, and I make an assumption that a future minister would see them as the delivery partners with government. I think you then have to ask yourself, do we need so many delivery partners? I think there is enormous value in having delivery partners, because as I said just earlier, government doesn't always speak the same language or work on the same time scales as organisations outside of government, particularly businesses. So I think you do need delivery partners, but I think it's worth having a look at the structure we have across all of them. Jersey Finance, Visit Jersey, Digital Jersey, Jersey Business, and Jersey Heritage and others. Do we have the right structure for those? Or most of them have been around for at least 10 years. Is it time to have a look and see if there can be any other structures?
So I'm trying to be topical as well, but there was a headline today about the Digital Jersey with saying they have to cut back on the Digital Academy work that they're doing. And there's an issue around, I think, where the funding comes from in terms of what your department provides and what education might provide. Do you have any thoughts about the Digital Academy and whether they need more funding? So
it has been a story from SIPES, from that department. I'm not particularly cited on that. I've had very brief, very informal conversation with the Minister for Education. Equally, I've had very brief, informal conversation with the CEO of Digital Jersey and the Chair of Digital Jersey. Not enough for me to really understand the nuts and bolts of it all. There will almost certainly be arguments for and against. I think it is important that people in Jersey need to be able to access the right training. But does a government entity have to deliver that training? Not necessarily. Through the Better Business Support Scheme, we have £1.5 million of grant money available to businesses. So, if you're a business today and you want to send one of your staff or 10 of your staff on training around AI, there is a grant that you can access today to help pay for that. And actually, one of the more negative sides of the Better Business Support Scheme over its first year was that the skills grants haven't been taken up in the amount that they could have been, and we were able to reallocate another $500,000, so that $1.5 million became $1 million in the end of this year, because the $500,000 went into the main Better Business Support package. And so I'd really encourage businesses to use those grants. So in that sense, there is funding for AI training or any other IT training, but business, and the advantage then is businesses can choose their provider. I always do worry a little bit about government bodies competing with the private sector, because you can blow holes in perfectly good private sector businesses by taking their market away from them in that respect. I don't know if that's I'm not suggesting that's what's happening. I don't know if that's what's happening, but that's always something that's in the back of my mind when I'm thinking about kind of government funding a public body to do something which often the private sector does. But it's quite possible in Jersey maybe there is no one doing AI training.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Wilson?
Thank you. I just wanted to build on that. I just wondered, do you foresee any risks in the budget to the economy at all as it's presented?
I think the risk, the big risk I would say I have is, and it's about the state's decision, is the the agriculture and fisheries, the rural and marine economy budget, which we voted through. The states kind of said it had to be 7 million and going up by RPI from now on. But one reading of that is seen as that coming to an end in 2027. It can't come to an end in 2027. That has to be ongoing funding into the future. And whoever's in the States, and none of us may be, or all of us may be, whoever is in the States following the elections, I really urge them to make sure that budget is protected, because Jersey's agriculture and fisheries industries cannot cope without it. And it doesn't need to grow. The 7 million plus RPI going forward is absolutely sufficient, but it can't come to an end.
On the issue of sufficiency, do you believe that this budget could withstand any further inflationary pressures at all in terms of delivery?
There's not much capital, there's not really any capital spend in our budget, so from that perspective, building inflation, things like that aren't a big problem. Obviously, from a wage perspective, there's an RPI +1 settlement for public sector workers, but that's managed by Treasury rather than by the department itself, so that's not a risk. And I can't think of any other inflationary pressures.
Yeah, I think the only real risk we see is if you take away the staff part of the department's budget, the most significant spend item is grants that we give to third-party organisations. That comes out of the non-pay element. Non-pay inflation, I think in the budget is about 2.3%, somewhere in that order. If there are higher levels of pay expectation in arm's length organisations than that figure, that becomes quite difficult. So over the years, we've tended to look at the grants through the lens of the non-pay inflation figure. But clearly some of these organisations employ people, and particularly from the era of very high inflation that we've just come off the back of, we've not always been able to provide the level of grant that's going to help them meet that level of staff demand. And that embeds a pressure then in those organisations, which we simply can't fulfil as a department. So that creates tension. It creates tension in the public sector as well. So in the same way that we've had to find efficiencies in other areas to afford things like public sector pay settlements, so we're asking that those states established delivery bodies are having to try and do the same thing. But it's challenging.
Yeah.
We know that. We're not seeing any particular challenges in terms of the inflationary outlook, in terms of getting back to this sort of 8-9%. So, it should be something that's manageable if indeed we get a bit of upward pressure. It should be manageable within the department's budget.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you.
Well, if I could just add one bit to it, if those, Rich is absolutely right about the arm's length organisations in all of their, there are many colours of arm's length organisation, but as they perhaps haven't had increased funding over the past few years to match increases in wages, one thing I would say is that, I think that's the sort of gentle constraint which would, in many of them, enable them to look at commercial opportunities and other ways of raising money for themselves. They are, in the main, not all of them, but they are in the main standalone companies with shareholders who aren't necessarily government. Some of them have shareholders, outside of government as well. And so I do think it is often quite a good pressure, which then says, actually, you're not getting all the money from government. You do need to go out and look at other ways of raising revenue. And I think that's appropriate. Or cutting costs, whichever way.
Can you give us an example of those businesses that might have shareholders outside that you fund?
Well, I think, for instance, shareholders might be the wrong word.
Stakeholders
might be better. But also you have trustees, so kind of Jersey Sport then has trustees, Digital Jersey has, I believe, trustees as well. And so they're they're not directly wholly owned by government in the way that, for instance, I was going to say Jersey Electricity, that was the wrong one. Jersey Telecom is, Jersey Telecom, quite simply owned by government through shares. These are kind of further separated by a layer of trustees. And others.
I think the critical aspect is that in terms of the department's relationships with organisations like Digital Jersey, Visit Jersey, Jersey Business, Jersey Sport, those are state-established delivery entities. So they've been set up for a purpose of delivering something on behalf of government where it's been felt at a point in time that that's better delivered slightly outside the perimeter of the public sector. That can change, and we have to recognise similarly that if there is a pressure because we can't grant as much money to certain of those organisations in any given financial period, that the amount that they can deliver for us may naturally be impaired by the amount of money that is available. But it's important we look at them down the right end of the telescope, not that these are independent commercial bodies that are going out and fundraising all by themselves. Some of them do have capacity to do that, so Digital Jersey runs membership, but others don't have that membership-driven revenue and therefore can't resort to other means to maybe close out a financial gap that they envisage.
And I know a good example there might be Visit Jersey. It's not got so many obvious commercial opportunities because they're a marketing organisation, but even they have in the past, not necessarily now, but they in the past have managed to raise some funding by, effectively there's been sponsorships or selling advertising via their website, etc., things like this. So even, perhaps less obvious opportunities are available to some.
Okay. There's been a slight increase in the proposed head of expenditure for economic development, tourism, sport and culture in the 26-28 budget. Can you confirm if this is inflationary or other reasons?
It's mainly inflationary. I don't think there's any particular big...
It's inflation,
I
yeah.
can't
So
think
there'll
of
be
any.
an uplift in non-pay inflation. The staff cost element is neutral because whatever the additional staff pay settlement is just regularised by Treasury to an equivalent amount. So inflationary less any savings is typically the year-on-year settlement.
Okay.
I was just trying to think whether there was something in the cybersecurity side, but there isn't. There is.
No. Okay.
Can we just
sorry, go
just to clarify, when you say it's inflationary, but it's still not keeping up with inflation, is it?
The savings to net off, so the 384 of savings that the Minister spoke of, then that nets off. So we'll have inflation in some parts of the budget, and we're going to have savings that we have to deliver in another part of the budget.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The efficiency. Did you set yourselves any internal targets around
that? So those are set for us. I think in terms of efficiency in the department, it's generally looking at what can we deliver. So we want to deliver as much of the minister's agenda, including the assistant ministers, as we can in a given year. But inevitably, you'll find there is more aspiration to do things than there is resource to deliver it. So it's a constant process in year of prioritisation with the ministerial team to ensure that we have the biggest items consistently in focus. And if time or budget allows, then other things may come onto the radar as we go through the year.
Okay. We've talked about any unforeseen increases in revenue demand, I think, as you've already alluded to. Could you tell us, Minister, in the statement of comprehensive net expenditure, could you just clarify what's included under other operating expenses?
Yeah, the 4.62 million.
Yeah.
I'll pass over to Richard to cover that. It's below the staff costs.
Yeah, so the staff cost part, other operating expenses, so there'll be other non-staff related aspects in terms of IT and equipment and so on. And there's other day-to-day expenditure that we may spend going out the way in terms of contracts for services, as opposed to the actual money that goes out the door in grants. But we could revert with a slightly more detailed breakdown of that if it's helpful for you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. The grants and subsidies payments have increased by around 1.5 million on what was anticipated in the last budget. Could you just explain why this is the case?
My thinking about that, because I wasn't aware that it exceeded it by 1.5 million, but would be around the Better Business Support Package, I would have thought, and particularly around the money for the arts, for agriculture and fisheries, where there's a £1.1 million subsidy to offset the rise in minimum wage. That would be my thinking on it. I don't know. What I do notice with grants and subsidies, over the next 4 years, 26 to 29, it basically remains flat for the coming 4 years. So
Okay.
not seen as anything, no extra there. I
Okay.
don't know if you have any extra light on.
So where we've had inflation in the arts, culture, heritage, 1%, much of that money is then being granted onwards outside of the department. So that would lead to grants obviously going up at a total level as well. And as the Minister has said, under the Better Business Support Package, there was additional money granted out to Visit Jersey that funded Bergerac, and there's been additional money granted out to businesses in terms of the business support scheme together with Jersey Business.
Another thing that happens with the arts, culture and heritage 1% is, I think it's a 6-month point, but in year there is a recalculation because it's based on government expenditure. The 1% is 1% of government expenditure. So if 6 months in government expenditure is higher or lower than expected, that 1% needs to be recalculated. So it's quite possible there's there as well.
Will that still happen now? Because the government's basically said we've exceeded the 1%, so we're at 1.2% is the official government line because they've included lots of other stuff
Like the library and things
in the culture. So is there a sense in which do you still need to recalculate that if you're exceeding it anyway?
I haven't asked that question. I doubt we would, given the circumstances you've outlined. So I can see why you wouldn't then necessarily recalculate it. Which, to be honest, I think is a better thing. I don't think it's appropriate to kind of recalculate. And like I said, you get a spiral of spending. Another department overspends, so we have to give more money to arts, culture and heritage. So I don't think it's the right thing to do. But it's really good for the sector. There's no question.
So it's recalculating down rather than recalculating up.
Well, usually it's been recalculated up. That's the thing, because government expenditure in other areas tends to be higher than expected. So it's, I think in all the years I've been involved, it's been recalculated up at that 6-month point.
Okay, thank you. There have been further alterations in the service level analysis estimate for 2026. Could you just talk us through these in terms of helping our understanding around this?
Which one was this?
So the service level analysis, I think it's on page
I haven't got the same document as you.
50.
Down there.
50,
Sorry, thank you.
yeah. Of the
My
annex.
eyesight is letting me
Yeah,
down.
it's this one if you want.
Yeah, I've got it here.
Okay.
So obviously, just starting from the top, local and digital economy.
Yeah.
No, that's us. There's no particular increase in spending. That is the main core of our work. Those are the departments, arts, culture, heritage, tourism, visitor economy, agriculture and rural and so on. So that is our basic departmental work going on there. The Future Economy Programme is specific to the Future Economy Programme and is delivered by the economy team led by Tom Holvey. Economics, again, is part of that, the work they do. In this case, it's a lot to do with the analysis they undertake, which is across governmental, what's the word? Support is the word I've got. It's not quite the right word, but resource is the word I was looking for. Management and government is a sad fact of life. Intellectual property is a specific project that's actually being run out of the External Relations Department, and it's my Assistant Minister, Deputy Scott, who's also Assistant Minister in External Relations, in order to do that work, and that is work about developing Jersey's intellectual property legislative system. And then similarly with Deputy Scott is the cybersecurity work, which you'll also note has some income against it, which is quite unusual for my department.
Yes.
But that's because the intention is, with the hope, actually I should say, is that they enter into a contract with Guernsey to provide cybersecurity services to Guernsey, but that is through a standard tender process rather than a kind of rather than a joint government agreement.
So we are in contract with the States of Guernsey, where their CERT capability. So we have the Jersey Cybersecurity Centre. Guernsey decided at a later stage that they wished to create something similar. They went out to tender, and the Jersey Cybersecurity Centre has won that tender. So they will provide a sort of shared level of service, as well as the States of Guernsey employing some staff in Guernsey. So the 500,000 you see is the recharge of the shared resource from the Jersey Centre to support Guernsey as well.
So it's just a scaling up really to actually deliver that contract.
Yeah. And it is, like say, a contract rather than an MOU between governments or anything like that. It's purely contractual.
Okay, thanks. We noticed that there was one less FTE employee in the Future Economy team, and if you could give us some idea of how this will impact the Future Economy programme.
I mean, that's one of the areas of headcount that, you know, the past year or so, that where we have lost a full-time equivalent. But
Yeah, so we had someone in 2024 and early 25, we had somebody on a fixed term contract. That contract expired and we recognised there was no need to take that work any further forward, so we weren't replacing that role. And similarly, there's a general pressure on headcount anyway in terms of no new positions being created, no replacements being created in departments such as ours. So that's where the one headcount has reduced.
And you don't think it will have any impact? You think that your redesign or your reallocation of work, you'll be able to absorb that?
Yeah, we're happy with that.
they were in on that fixed term contract. It was to do a specific piece of work,
Okay.
analysis in this case, but there was a particular thing they were doing.
And generally what we've tried to do over time in the department is where we have work that we think has a shelf life attaching to it, and it's been beyond the core department headcount, is to employ somebody on a fixed term contract commensurate with when we expect that work to finish, rather than adding to the permanent headcount in the public sector.
Okay, thank you. And the management and government cost estimates have increased by 1.2 million. Could you just give us an indication of what?
There's a sad fact of life. I will hand to Richard for this one.
Basically, what we do is we hold money in the management and governance line so that it's available for the minister to spend down through the year on other issues that may come up in year. So it's not an additional cost for management and governance. It just happens to be the sort of the savings pot, so to speak, within the department can use over the course of the year to drip feed in based on other unexpected things that invariably come up through the year.
Which, do happen every year.
Yeah.
Can I just go back, sorry, Deputy, to the, because there are other reductions in headcount, aren't there? So we've just looking at the projected reduction, so it goes from 26 FTEs in local and digital to 23, so you'll be losing 3 full-time employees into 27, and then there's also one more reduction in economics.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us about?
So those are just headcount numbers. So the financial aspect of that has already gone. So we're on the right cost trajectory. Separately, there's the number of posts. So the posts will be removed, but as I say, we've already taken the jobs out and we've made the resultant savings. So it's just that for the purposes of calculating overall public sector headcount, the posts will be removed. So there is nobody in those posts
Those are
today.
vacant at the moment.
Yeah,
They're empty posts.
It's just not recruiting. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Just in terms of your management and governance budget, could you give us an indication of what kind of extra expenditure you will incur during 2026?
It's not so much extra expenditure, it's used there as a sort of shock absorber for things across the department. So we set the budgets principally around grants, and then we hold the balance of the money back for requests that come in through the year. So we may get additional requests for, I don't know, the air display, the Battle of Flowers. We try and hold that money centrally rather than allocate it out, just as a better budgeting mechanism. And we then say to each of the directorates, right, you need to come in with a request for any additional money over and above what was intended. And then the minister ultimately will determine whether that's a priority he wishes to fund or whether he wishes to hold the money back for something else.
Gives you some flexibility to work
Yeah.
with things.
You do. I think every department needs some flexibility somewhere.
Yeah. Great. We've already talked about the issue in relation to the cybersecurity and the £500,000, so thank you for that. In terms of last year's review, you identified that £847,000 within the Economics and Future Economy budget that relates to the Jersey Competition Regulation Authority. Can you confirm if this expenditure continues, noting a slight increase in the economic line this year?
I believe it does continue.
Yeah, so there's the JCRA derives its total budget as an organisation from a couple of means. One of them is the grant for competition-related work, and then separately it charges those that it economically regulate, such as telecoms companies and also Ports of Jersey and Jersey Post for the parts that they do there.
Yeah.
So there is a grant from the department. That grant will always be something, because the JCRA doesn't have additional revenue-raising opportunities in the field of competition regulation, so that has to be granted by government. The minister hasn't yet made a decision on grants that will be made for 2026. That's a process we're working through with the minister at the moment around the level of grant that we provided to each of the organisations. And those grants are based on needs for the year ahead rather than wants or previous years' levels of funding, because we have to be forward-looking and base it on the needs of the organisation and the level of reserves that organisation might be holding, where the work could perhaps be funded a little bit more from within rather than from just receiving the same grant as they did in the prior
And
year.
do you expect the same amount, given what you've just said around the revenue raising, do you expect that will be similar to that figure, or do you think there will be?
It ultimately be down to the minister, so...
But I mean, I'd say it tends to be, and as a department as well, we're always very keen to be the department that doesn't overspend things like this. So I think it does tend to match, and what wouldn't happen is that we go beyond it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We're going to move on to some questions about the Better Business Support Package, which I'll ask Deputy Andrews to lead on.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, obviously it's coming to the end of our first year since the Better Support Package came to fruition. And I would just like to hear from you, how successful do you think the scheme has been, and what have the main implications of such a scheme been for you?
So I think it has been really successful. As with anything, only time will tell as to the kind of overall economic impact, but the main part of the Better Business Support Package, in terms of the productivity grants, that was meant to be 2.3 million. It was oversubscribed because the skills was undersubscribed. We were able to move 500,000 from skills to there to make it 2.8 million. And we've seen businesses engage with it really well. We've seen it was meant to be a kind of matched funding situation, 50 from government, 50 from the business. We've seen a lot more than 50% coming in from the businesses. So for every £100 the government's put in, the private sector has put in £190. Okay. So from that perspective, we have clearly triggered a level of investment in businesses. So I keep saying businesses, but it is all organisations that employ people. So it's charities and and other organisations. When I say businesses, think of it in those terms. It's any employing organisation. The fact that we have triggered that investment is really important because, again, the Chief Economic Advisor had told us all a year or so ago that Jersey has weak levels of business reinvestment. Yep. And so to be able to kick that off and trigger that, I think is the greatest success of this so far.
So overall, for 10 million, would you say there has been a really good uptake across all the different areas, or has it been maybe
skills
in some?
Not so. No. Skills not so, sadly. Obviously, things like the destination marketing that was going to be spent by Visit Jersey, so that was going to happen. The route development, Ports of Jersey are still working on that. Obviously, you're trying to align with the commercial intentions of airlines. Yeah. So they have to want to fly to Jersey. They have to want to put Jersey in, and I know that the CEO of Ports of Jersey is still working on that, but there are some good signs coming out of it. The Royal and Marine grant, like I said, that was a straight-through subsidy, and employee support is actually for the Minister for Social Security. So I think the main headline part of this, the productivity grant, was a huge success. Yeah. I really hope we get the skills grant used much more next year. I think that's really important. Yep. We all know the importance of Jersey having a skills base and also lifelong learning. So again, the skills grant isn't just for 20-year-olds, leaving college. It's for anyone at any age to be invested in by their employers. Yeah. So I think that's the thing I'd like to see really change. And are you a bigger uptake.
And are you aware about how much has been expended to date and how much is available still?
I probably do have that here. From the skills grant specifically.
Altogether from the 10 million.
You can take it for pretty much most of the 10 million.
10 million pounds.
Yeah.
Okay, and obviously going into 2026 in terms of this government budget, I mean, what changes could there potentially be in terms of the way how the funding is managed, or do you believe that things will just remain as is?
I think they'll mostly remain as they are.
Yeah.
We might choose to take that 500,000 that we ended up taking from the skills and putting it into the productivity grants. That might be something we do at the beginning rather than halfway through the year.
Yeah.
I think the Visit Jersey side, we know there's a need for the marketing, so that's absolutely fine. The Ports of Jersey side, I think, is really important. Yeah, the agricultural side can't change. That needs to be there. So I don't see it changing very much.
Yeah, and in terms of when you spoke about just previously about the skills grant, why do you think there was a low uptake?
I genuinely don't know. I think it's probably a lesser known part of the package. So I think a lot of the advertising, I must say, I think Jersey Business did a really good job advertising it, and then managing it as well.
Yes.
The actual grant, application and payment system was really smooth and really good.
Yeah.
So maybe there's a role for us or for Jersey Business to promote the skills side of it more.
Yeah.
Help people understand that it is for anyone in their organisation, not just young people. It could be anyone of any age, and also try to make employees understand that this money is there for them, so they can approach their their bosses and say, look, this money is available. I'd really like to do this course.
Yeah.
Why don't we see if we can use that money from government to do that course? So I'll ask Jersey Business to see if they have any other insights, and whether they think promoting it more may help a bit more.
And you also mentioned as well with rural and the marine industries in particular, they've been struggling of late. I just wanted to ask you a question about the funding increase that has obviously been proposed within this government budget. How important is the additional funding to those particular industries?
It's absolutely vital. One thing I would say is that the agricultural side, I think the struggles are now behind us.
Okay.
I think there was a media report a couple of months ago which suggested otherwise, but I learned that media report was actually taken from a 2022 article.
Oh, I see.
So it was completely out of date.
Yeah.
And but because if you speak to the farming sector, whether it's growers or dairy, they were in a much, much better place than they were 3 years ago when I took over. Yeah. Fishing and agriculture, that's different. They are in a very difficult place.
Okay.
We are trying to sit down with them and say, what is the future for the industry? Because we want there to be a future for the industry, but there are so many headwinds for that sector right now. Everything from climate change to Brexit to just changing tastes. Species moving in that weren't in before. It's really, really hard. A minimum wage puts pressure on.
Could I just ask you, given what you've just said, do you think that it's the right model to support them?
For the fishing sector, I think that this is the first time it's ever happened. So, as I speak to people in that sector and they're proud of the fact that they've never before asked for government subsidy. They're really proud of that, and I'm grateful to them for that. Many of them don't like having a government subsidy, which shows their independence, and I'm really appreciative of that. At the moment, it's in many places the only thing that's keeping some of them fishing. So I think it'd be difficult to withdraw that money. But the exercise I would like to do, actually speaking to the chair's earlier question about the future, the next 6 or 7 months, fishing sector and agriculture sector slap bang in the middle of my priorities top of my priorities, because we need to get a direction. And that will mean, I think, we need outside views, so we will have to kind of beat the consultants ban to get somebody in to help us, because I don't think we have the expertise in-house to be able to do that work. But I think we need to sit down with the industry and with experts and work out what is the best way to get a direction for that industry.
Can I jump in and ask? So even if the marine sector are being productive, is it not an issue if they can't export some of their products to France because they're getting we're being told they're getting spurious?
That's one of the many headwinds.
Projections.
One of the many headwinds. That's exactly right. The difficulty in crossing the border. Their market is Europe.
Where does the support for breaking down those barriers come? Which is it? Your department? Is it external relations? Who?
All of it. It's the environment department, it's external relations department, and it's our department. Yeah. I was in France last week for the Breton Summit. I sat down the evening I arrived. I sat down with Breton fishermen and vice president from the region, talking about fishing. So it comes in those sorts of, we talked about the difficulties crossing the border, things like this. So it comes in, the support for trying to get rid of that obstacle comes in all sorts of different ways, from official communications through to unofficial and informal communications. The most important thing was the desire to keep talking. And the thing I was really pleased with on the Breton side was they want Jersey's fishing sector to succeed as well. It's vital to the port of St Malo.
Thank you.
Minister, obviously this is the government plan. It's the last year in office for this Council of Ministers. But thinking beyond this term of office, do you think the Better Business Support Package will need to continue to support those particular industries that we've just mentioned?
I think so. Yes, and if we're talking about rural and marine industries, then the 1.1 million we have in there for effectively subsidising the increase in the minimum wage. Yes, it needs to stay there. It can't, if you take that 1.1 million away, they've got a massive problem paying their wages. It's that simple. So that has to stay.
So in essence, government financial support will be needed to cover those baseline wage workers in those particular industries.
I think it will need to continue.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, as I said at the beginning, Deputy Luce's proposition, which the state agreed to provide greater levels of support to the sector, that's vital for the sector. You must remember, this is not a sector that can stand on its own feet commercially, because we have no scale in Jersey. We have quality, which is brilliant, but we have no scale. And you're competing against entirely subsidised European and UK
as well,
and and Irish, but they're European industries. So our industry back in 2018 had £800,000 of support from government. That's it. Effectively, no support from government. It could not continue on those lines with no scale, and it's competing against massively subsidised sectors. So the £7 million that we actually get, £8 million plus 1.1. I think we get a superb value for money out of. Not only do we get a countryside which looks superb, but we export. Our milk is now going to Korea, South Korea, I hasten to add, and I believe Hong Kong as well. Potatoes are now going into Europe and as far away as Dubai. We are really getting Jersey produce out there in all sorts of different ways as a really quality product. And that's the key for everything. And it'll be the same for fishing. This is one of the things we've got to try to understand. How do we make Jersey's fishing sector a quality fishing sector in people's minds? Because, a bass caught here looks very much like a bass caught off the Netherlands, for instance. How do we differentiate those in order to get that sense of Jersey being a quality product, able to command higher prices in the market? Because the market price we are getting doesn't really support the cost base that Jersey has, because the market price is set in St Malo. It's not set here. And so it doesn't represent the cost base that Jersey is.
Yeah, and I think if you look across the business support package in its entirety, the second worst thing you can do, for, the first one being not funding, the second worst is a cliff edge being attached to that funding. And the fact that this is a support package for 25 and 26, if you run a cliff edge, off the cliff edge at the end of 26, you've got a big problem in terms of destination marketing and what you do around route development, as well as what the Minister said around fisheries, for example. So I think that's going to be a decision for next year as to, is the continuity that goes behind some of these support measures is really, really important, because as we move towards that living wage, that's a challenge for businesses to be able to digest. They won't overcome that indigestion just in 24 months in terms of maybe pivoting the business and becoming more productive. So there needs to be some thought given to that longer term.
Sorry, thank you. Just in terms of the business support package, could I just flip to the agricultural loans position, Minister, if I could? Can you confirm if there are any transfers from the consolidated funds to the agricultural loans in 2025, and are they still planned for 2026?
When you say have we made any loans?
Yes
is the answer.
Okay.
So far, obviously the capitalisation for this year was £5 million. We've delivered 8 loans to date, £1.853 million. Approved loans, of which not drawn down, 2 of them were 493,463, and there's £2 million worth of loans waiting sign off, so that adds up to the 5 million. So you've got 1.8 million delivered, 493,000 approved, not drawn down, and then 2.025 million currently recommended and waiting sign off.
Okay. Are there any impacts are there reasons for the delay in those funds?
Yes, the principal reason for delay is these are sort of first time round loans. So if you go back to the Agricultural Loans Fund of many years ago, documentation requirements and internal governance requirements now are much more stringent. So we've had to develop a whole suite of documentation for the loan agreements, for the application process, for security that's taken to support those loans. So, huge credit to our sector lead for rural and marine and his immediate colleagues, and also to colleagues in the Treasury for working through that to the point that we've now, the first loan was going to be the hardest one to do for exactly those reasons. And we now have more of a sort of cookie cutter type template that can follow through and see these other ones drawn much more quickly.
And does that mean that every year the 5 million will be spent if it's going to stay at 5 million, or do you actually envisage money being drawn down and then having to follow over into the following year?
It's a good question. I don't know exactly, but what I would say is that the money can be recycled as payments come in. I think a good thing to again, similar to the overall package, through the grants for agriculture and rural marine, we can't lose that. Equally, we can't lose the agricultural loan scheme. And so, you know, one way of enabling its sustainability is obviously money that is paid back. It should stay within the fund to help future loans being repaid. But we will need. I think it's clear it's such a highly capital intensive sector, both rural and marine, that you can't rely on the commercial sector to support that lending. It's just not there.
I think we're trying to just understand the impact if there is any delay to the economy on that basis.
I think the impact would be significant on that part of the economy. It has been difficult on some businesses because it has taken time to get the system set up, particularly around the governance and the requirements from Treasury. That has taken time, more time than we expected, and that has put pressure on the businesses themselves, who had often made commitments and were relying on these loans. But that is, as Richard said, now all in place. That situation where it's taking time for things to get all the governance sorted out shouldn't be there in the future. So it should mean that it should be a much speedier process.
Do you have any other comment on the progress of the loans at all? People coming forward, are they interested to want to access this kind of support?
People have been, and it's at all scales. I know I visited a farm in St Saviour where they've got a new milking parlour in there. It's absolutely outstanding, and having been in there before, just a couple of years ago, it gives a whole new lease of life. And for the farm I'm thinking of in particular, enables family members to think about the succession and taking on the farm. Without the new milking parlour, family members would have been less interested in taking on that farm. But by getting that sort of capital commitment in place, it enables that succession, which is really vital for Jersey. There's also the smallholder side, which is, and kind of almost start-up farms, for want of a better word, that need to grow and need to invest in capital. That enables succession in the industry as well, which is really important.
Yeah, sounds more sustainable as well.
Yeah.
I just want to move to nursery provision, if I might. With regards to the island's workforce, what are the expected long-term economic benefits should the 15 hours free nursery provision be approved, particularly in terms of workforce participation and productivity?
Yeah.
And have you got any targets or measures around how you see the economy benefiting in terms of improved productivity should this be introduced?
I think it's sad that I'd have to say I don't think we do have any targets, and I think but the fact that you're asking makes me think that this is something we should look at. I think one of the main benefits is enabling parents to get back into the workplace for some time. I think one of the downsides is that the 15 hours doesn't match kind of even a part-time working week. So most part-time working weeks are 20 hours. I think this is something we have across the school system and the working system. Hours often don't match what parents kind of would be better for parents, and I think there could be a really good realignment between kind of school hours and working hours, which just makes the economy work more smoothly, and so relieves pressure on parents from having to either leave work early, feeling bad about that often, or having to race across, from their workplace across the island to try and pick up children on time, things like this. So I think there can be a whole balancing around that, full stop.
How do you think that the value and the productivity will be realised if it's introduced? What would you wish to see?
Yeah, well, people being in a workplace longer, being able to stay in a workplace longer, and let's be frank here, most of these people are women, because whilst many men do take on caring responsibilities, and I was one of them, they still are the minority in that area. So most of this is, it'll be enable women to get back into the workplace, which in itself means that they will maintain the confidence that many people do lose when they take time off for parenting. It also means that they'll stay on top of what's happening in their sector, which means that in itself they will be more productive in themselves because they're not having to start after a 10-year gap and start not from scratch, but pick up what's happened in the last 10 years. And so it enables parents to stay in the workplace for longer, which enables them to be kind I use this word advising, but better at their jobs than if they're
Do
taking
you
a
see
10-year
any
gap.
particular sector where this really should have more direct targeting in terms of supporting productivity?
I can't think of any. If I'm understanding the question, I don't know if there's a particular sector, but I might
So is
not
there any
understand the
particular
question.
sector in the economy where you think this will be particularly beneficial than in other areas?
I don't think there's any one sector. I mean, sectors, the financial services and legal services industry, I think will benefit hugely. I think education will as well, and nursery, because they rely on a lot of teaching assistants who are often parents working part-time, so I think they'll benefit from this as well. And the health sector, because I think people will be able to work in that sector who perhaps at the moment aren't able to and take time off. But I don't think there'll be any one winner, if you know what I mean. I don't think so.
That's all right. Just
That might be
your
wrong.
view on that.
I'm trying to think if you've got a sector in your head. I'm trying to work out.
Well,
which
I was
one it
just
is.
thinking that given some of the difficulties around, we've had some figures around the scale of, migration in terms of people picking up some of the lower paid work, and whether or not this might have an impact on that.
It'd be nice. I think the problem there is the words lower paid work, which are probably the reasons people don't work in it more than time. But I'd love to think we're wrong, and it would be a sector that could benefit from the time that's made available. I completely agree. But whether the lower pay element of it means that it doesn't. But of course, the minimum wage is rising, so that makes it easier in itself. Makes it easier in itself. But it's a good point.
Is it all right if I bring us onto a different subject?
Yeah.
We may need to come back to some of these just for the last 5 minutes,
Sorry.
Minister. Can we turn to arts, culture and heritage? I know that obviously you've got Charlotte here.
Charlotte here for that reason.
But the first question is for you really, Minister.
No, of course.
Are you happy with the inclusion of new expenditure such as the Community Compass, Public Libraries, Jersey Music Service being lumped in now with the, what was the 1% for arts?
I'll be frank, not entirely, no. I think my concern is that in the future, so at the moment, it's fine. The money that we have, the £12 million, for argument's sake, that we have, isn't being touched. My concern is that in the future, the inclusion of those will be used as a reason to reduce that £12 million. That's my concern. It's not a concern I have as Minister today for today. It's a concern for the future.
I mean, I think the original vision that I certainly had for the 1% and what many expected, perhaps yourself, I can't, you were a backbencher, I think, at the time when you
happily
supported.
voting for you.
The idea was that the four arm's length organisations, as were, so would not receive a cut in their funding, but they get some protection. There was a letter that went out. But so already at that point we had the inclusion of Gérier and Liberation Day events, which were included in that, which is not money that your department ever gets, but it's money that is included in the 1%. Yeah. And is there an issue here that actually what we're seeing is creative accountancy from the Treasury Minister?
I don't know if, I'm not going to use those slightly more provocative words when it comes to accountants, but it is definitely a way that could be used for reducing the actual cash that gets spent.
I mean, is it right to include teachers' salaries in arts funding? I mean, we've got Jersey Music Service for teachers. Most of the Gérier, in fact, is teachers' wages.
It's interesting. It's I don't, and I appreciate I'm going out a bit on a limb here. I don't think it is entirely right. But I think from the Gérier perspective, I've always felt very comfortable with it. And partly, I guess, because I'm a huge supporter of Gérier. So and I actually feel there's still, I think you're aware, a conversation going on within Gérier and the education department as to where it best sits.
But if we focus on the
I think there's a good argument to potentially take it away from education so that we can fund it all entirely through.
But let's look at the new spending, so that they've included this. And not new spending, it's old spending which they've now lumped in. So the Jersey libraries, I mean, should that be coming out of the 1%?
I don't believe it should, because I agree the spirit of your proposition at the time was very much around these grant-funded organisations rather than overall spending. Art and music need to be taught in school regardless, in my view. They're not added extras. I'm not an expert on the curriculum, and maybe music is optional in the curriculum, I don't know. But for me, as an islander, I expect children to be taught art and music, come what may, if you know what I mean, in schools.
And feel free to bring in your sector lead, but in terms of the allocations that will go to the four, and let's include Ballet Jerry in that, so that maybe the five, those 5 arms. Then, at what point will we be able to scrutinise the budgets that they'll be allocated? Will it be before the budget is finalised, or is it going to be afterwards?
Yeah, well, we're still awaiting. We've had some draft business plans, and we've had we're working with those that have provided draft business plans to see, you know, if all or some or however much of those business plans can be funded. I would expect it to be done before the budget debate itself, but yeah, you're in conversation at the moment with those organisations and their draft business plans. We haven't had draft business plans from all of them. But you'd expect
October's normally the month where we're going back and forth with them and looking at their business plans together, and then by the end of October we would expect to have finalised plans.
I think we'd welcome any insight of those, even if it's initially confidential, but just so we can see who the win. Well, I don't want to talk in these terms, but the winners and losers are in.
The graph you have in front. The graph I have in front of me, which is from the Arts and Culture report the other day. It's not going to change that much. You know, at the end of the day, those, you know, Jersey Heritage takes half the money of the Arts, Culture and Heritage grant. They are still going to be taking half the money.
I think the big concerns I've got is that when we get to 28, 29 and we're seeing the flatlining already, that the government budget's, you know, at 1.5 billion, which some will think is eye-watering, but we know there's an increase in health spending, yet the core grant to those organisations is going to be, you know, 11 million. So we're seeing a vast undering, you know, it's dipping well below the 1% and what the intention was by that stage. So I just can't help feeling those.
Well, that depends on government expenditure, though. So the only way you can flatten those last couple of years, in theory, is because government expenditure won't be going up between 28 and 29. I think that's, you know, I'd love to think that's likely. I can't think of a time when government expenditure hasn't risen year on year. So I think it's unlikely.
I'm just worried is what's been lumped in here. If we're going to start to see this methodology, you know, why not include art teachers in there?
Yeah.
Why not include design tech?
I'm as uncomfortable as you are.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I think but equally, and this is relatively brutal. It's frank. It's true. This budget, whilst it has a 4-year outlook, none of us know what the next government or who the next government will be. And so in my mind, when I look at 27, 28 and 29, that's entirely up for grabs. That's, you know, we just don't know. I mean, if it's the same government as today, then maybe those figures will hold. But for instance, we've talked about the need for, you know, better business support to continue in some ways, etc. So I know Visit Jersey, we'd love to see some more money going in there. These are all arguments that the Economic Development Minister needs to be making in 2026, because without any knowledge of the government for next year, everything from 27 onwards is.
I mean, I think fundamentally it's
indicative only.
It's the difference in what the 1% was intended or hoped to include versus trying to find a definition that, you know, from an accounting perspective, you can say, right, well, that holds water. I think where we've got to is in 2026, the allocation is 1.2%. There's then a push down of that from 26 to 29 out to being a 1.1% figure. I think that's something, I think, you know, for the Minister and for the Assembly to debate as to what that allocation should be. Now that a definition has been arrived at, what's the right allocation going forwards? And indeed, is a percentage allocation the right way forwards, or is there some other mechanism that, you know, would better do the job?
I mean, you know, the last budget, I know your amendment, was it an amendment or was it a proposition before the comment? I can't remember, but that proposition won, which is fine. But I was comfortable with the RPI, the idea that it goes up by RPI on the book, in essence, because it strips out what's happening in those last 3 lines of the community compass, etc. And I knew that wouldn't then happen. And also because it's 1% of expenditure isn't right. That if another department overspends, more money goes to art, culture and heritage. You could argue that it's a disciplinary tool for departments that overspend and encourages them not to. But outside of that, I think it is.
Be careful, or you'll get more art.
Exactly. We'll get the finger paints out. But you know, so I did see merit in the RPI because I just thought it'll put all this to bed and we'd have a constant growth along the RPI framework.
We'll leave the questioning there, but if there are any final thoughts from my side of the table, and have you got any points for us?
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. Well, there will no doubt be some written questions to follow up on, but we wish you all the best with the budget, and